At first, all the hairs on his body were burned off and his fingernails were pulled out. His tendons were then cut, he was bored with drills and subjected to various other tortures. Throughout, he did not flinch once, nor did his face change color. In the end, his back was split, he was boiled in soy sauce, and his body was bent back in two. That's the whole story. That's it. Like, that's the parable. It's like they tortured the shit out of this guy and he didn't fucking move. Hello, I'm back with some audio this time, and I wanted to put together a quick little episode, you could say, on a book that I have read more times than most people who have read this book. The book in question, and I hope you'll excuse some extra sounds of my keyboard and stuff because I'm just chilling at my desk right now and I'm looking through a PDF version of it. But the book in question is called Hagakure. And on the edition I have here, it says Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai by Yamamoto Tsunetomo. Forgive my mangling of whatever transliteration. But this is a book that I've read more than most people who've read it because I've read it probably upwards of 15 times, 20 times. And the reason is that when I was a kid, I went through a period, a strange period, where I was obsessed with the samurai. And I was obsessed with this book in particular. This was kind of the main thing. Like, I did a lot of weird stuff. I watched a lot of kung fu movies. I love kung fu movies. Oh God, sometime I would love to do reviews of kung fu movies or do some kind of guide to that whole genre. And I read a lot of books. I used to go to Borders. There was a Borders books by where I grew up after school, and I would spend the pocket money I had on martial arts books, and I cleaned them out. And this is the one that stuck as like my favorite. So I don't really know how I want to do this. I'm kind of just going off the cuff, but let me say a little bit about this book. So, well, let's look it up. When was this actually made? Toshiro Tsurumoto compiled these commentaries from his conversations with Tsunetomo from 1709 to 1716. However, it was not published until many years afterwards. So this is a 1700s manual on, Bushido. It's on the samurai way. And it's an interesting work in a lot of ways. And one of them is that it's something I did not understand until many years later, which is that it's sort of tempting as a Westerner to take this as like a or the representative of like the central thing that the samurai were doing. It's tempting to be like, oh, here's my Bushido book, right? However, if you imagine that somebody, 300 years from now found the writings of Eliezer Yudkowsky or found the writings of Mencius Moldbug, Curtis Yarvin, and they thought, oh, well, this probably represents like a 21st century perspective, they would be sorely wrong. And this is kind of an error that I made when I was, 12 or 13 and reading this thing every day, because I thought that the Hagakure was like the Bushido book. It's more like a book by a dude who thought Bushido needed like a jump start. So it's possible that, this book is like by the Eliezer Yudkowsky of Samurai Japan. Nevertheless, I don't really know enough about the period to say how it like differs from the central strains and whatever, but I do think that it's a work of, it's kind of like a reaction in a way to a world that the author saw as in decline. So anyway, that's enough. That's plenty of intro, more than enough intro, probably too much intro. Let's just start the book, and I'm just going to read the initial lines, and it'll immediately give you a sense of what this is about. Chapter 1. Although it stands to reason that a samurai should be mindful of the way of the samurai, it would seem that we are all negligent. Consequently, if someone were to ask, what is the true meaning of the way of the samurai, the person who would be able to answer promptly is rare. This is because it has not been established in one's mind beforehand. From this, one's unmindfulness of the way can be known. Negligence is an extreme thing. The way of the samurai is found in death. When it comes to either or, there is only the quick choice of death. It is not particularly difficult. Be determined and advance. To say that dying without reaching one's aim is to die a dog's death is the frivolous way of sophisticates. When pressed with the choice of life or death, it is not necessary to gain one's aim. So, it continues like this. The structure of the book, just in case anybody's curious, is these aphorisms. So it's really wonderful in that way, where it's kind of like Human All Too Human by Nietzsche, or Proverbs in the Bible, where you can just open it up and bam, like here's a paragraph that gives you something interesting. And yeah, a lot of the book does review this kind of, it attempts to instill this kind of mindset, and death is a major theme. I believe I've talked about Mishima before. I've written about Mishima before on the newsletter, and Mishima is a 20th century writer and playwright who himself has a book about the Hagakure. So it's called like Mishima on Hagakure or something like that. And the reason I mention it is because I found that comparison interesting, right? As like a person who's reflecting on something that came before and trying to manifest it. I feel like what's the move here? I think I just want to kind of skip through and read individual sections. So here's another one that I'll read really quick, which gives you a sense of a different type of content that's in this book. It is a fact that fish will not live where the water is too clear, but if there is duckweed or something, the fish will hide under its shadow and thrive. Thus, the lower classes will live in tranquility if certain matters are a bit overlooked or left unheard. This fact should be understood with regard to people's conduct. Okay, that's fucking funny. Fish won't live where the water is clear, but if there's duckweed, they'll hide under the shadow and thrive. Likewise, the lower classes live in tranquility if certain matters are a bit overlooked or left unheard. It's like, don't put it all out on the table, right? Don't WikiLeaks the poor sods who are just trying to believe in your society. That's interesting. A lot of the stuff in the Hagakure has this character. Firstly, parables out the ass, like a lot of little funny stories and metaphors about things like duckweed. A lot of it is social advice. And so I guess, yeah, that's another interesting point that I should probably make about it, which is that the work essentially sets itself up as advice for a retainer. This word retainer is used frequently. I don't actually know what it means, but what I understood it to mean is that the retainer is the servant warrior, a person who's on retainer. It's the word samurai comes from to serve, from some verb in Japanese, to serve. And a lot of what's interesting about this period, so again, this is written in the 1700s. The Tokugawa period is 1868, ends in 1868 and begins in 1600. So it's a 268-year period in which Japan is closed and at peace and ruled by the Tokugawa and their affiliates. And that's notable because the samurai are in an interesting position at that time. Prior to 1600, there's a lot of war, and the warrior society is at war. Afterwards, they spend a lot of time doing stuff like writing poetry and training and taking care of internal affairs, but there's not any war, I think. And I have always taken Tsunetomo to be largely regarding this sort of regretfully. It's like he really is chomping at the bit. But part of the challenge I think he's presenting is, how do the samurai stay sharp during times of peace? How do they not grow decadent, right? How do they not just lay around and be unready for the next challenge? Skip forward a little bit. There are two things that will blemish a retainer, and these are riches and honor. If one but remains in strained circumstances, he will not be marred. It's interesting. Makes me think of Aristotle. Aristotle says something along the lines of, if I'm not misquoting, that if you aim for riches or aim for honors or aim for power, you'll gain none of these. But if you aim to be virtuous, aim for the good, then everything you need will come. That seems at odds because this says just remain in strained circumstances. But again, very important to remember, this is not all advice for a leader. Um, it's advice for a follower. In an important way, this samurai is kind of like this super soldier, right? Where they're meant to, like, on command, go and fuck shit up unhesitatingly. At the beginning, we had that bit about, when there's the choice of death, just do death. Tsunetomo has this very interesting concept of just immediately going to your death, right? This like hair trigger revenge instinct, where there's a famous story in the lore of the samurai called the 47 Ronin. Is that right? Yes, 47 Ronin. They made a shitty movie about it with Keanu Reeves. The 47 Ronin is about a group of samurai whose master is betrayed and killed, and they all disperse across the land and become Ronin. They become without masters, right? Which is a shit place to be in for a samurai, because it's your whole purpose, it's your whole identity. And then a year later, they gather together and take revenge. Overthrow whoever took their master's stuff, and then they all kill themselves. In that ideology, that's considered a good thing. It's considered like a good end, right? And Tsunetomo, interestingly, criticizes this. So it kind of shows a little bit of like a split in his perspective versus his society, or what he's kind of what his angle is, because he says they should have just just taken revenge immediately, right? These guys could have left for a year, and okay, they were lucky. Nobody got hit by a car or a carriage or whatever. No one got sick, and no one lost their will. But any of those things could have happened. Instead, they should have immediately solved the problem. And so there's this kind of like scorpion-like, immediate vengeance thing that he talks about a bunch. Scrolling ahead. Yeah, a lot of this is the mindset on training. So training is a thing I've talked about a lot in the newsletter as well, and it's something I care about a great deal. I have found that a thing that balances me in life more than almost any other is trying to gain skill, having some kind of art, some kind of thing I train up against. But here's a line. Ikumo Oribe said, "If a retainer will just think about what he is to do for the day at hand, he will be able to do anything. If it is a single day's work, one should be able to put up with it. Tomorrow, too, is but a single day." It's kind of like salaryman advice. Still looking for... Some of these are kind of like longer stories about crazy shit that went down, often meant to teach some lesson. I could read a... Oh, here we go. This looks interesting. Oh, this one's violent. Here we go. Horie Sanemon's misdeed was robbing the Nabeshima warehouse in Edo of its money and fleeing to another province. He was caught and confessed. Thus it was pronounced, because this is a grave crime, he should be tortured to death. And Nakano Daigaku was ordered to be the official who verified the execution. At first, all the hairs on his body were burned off and his fingernails were pulled out. His tendons were then cut, he was bored with drills and subjected to various other tortures. Throughout, he did not flinch once, nor did his face change color. In the end, his back was split, he was boiled in soy sauce, and his body was bent back in two. That's the whole story. That's it. Like, that's the parable. It's like they tortured the shit out of this guy and he didn't fucking move. Some of these you're like, okay, maybe that happened. Okay, they boiled him in soy sauce. All right, that seems a little like, did they actually do that? I don't know. I guess I wouldn't really be surprised. but some of them are like not like couldn't be true, or if they were, it would be quite bizarre. Um, this is from memory now, but I know that there's a couple stories that have this sort of format, where one of them is like a guy was executed, he had his head cut off, and then when the magistrate came over to investigate, he leapt up and beheaded the magistrate, though he himself was already beheaded. Um, and that proves that there's always one more act that you can perform, right? And you read that and you're like, it probably didn't exactly happen, but I don't know, man. Weird stuff happens sometimes. Another one like that where the guy gets burned alive, and then it's like the same kind of thing. The magistrate or whatever comes to investigate, and then the burned body jumps up and cuts the dude's head off. This is also where you get that quote that I think I've seen cited in other places, which is maybe I can find it. It's very. Here we go. This is legendary. It is said that every time Okihyobu's group gathered, and after all their affairs were finished, he would say, "Young men should discipline themselves rigorously in intention and courage. This will be accomplished if only courage is fixed in one's heart. If one's sword is broken, he will strike with his hands. If his hands are cut off, he will press the enemy down with his shoulders. If his shoulders are cut away, he will bite through 10 or 15 enemy necks with his teeth. Courage is such a thing." Hell yeah, dude. Um, you get a sense. Right? It's like, imagine a society of, you've got the society of warriors, and they're like not exactly battle tested, but then you have this dude Tsunetomo telling them to imagine, to like get hyped up, right? It's like get like in the zone, basically. Like, I don't mean to describe it in this kind of bizarre modern way, but that is what it is. And it's like the mindset described. It's honestly, it's the same sort of thing that you see when you look at World War II, and you look at the kamikaze pilots, and you look at all these suicidal charges that happen in the Pacific theater, and this like astounding battle spirit that you read different things about how the West reacted. Of course, the Western response was to call the some of the kamikaze planes baka bombs, meaning like baka is like stupid, um, which I guess to a Westerner it is, right? That's like that patent bit, you know, make the other sons of bitches die for their country. But yeah, no, I mean, I like this for like a bit of a witness to that perspective. I'll read a couple more of these and then call it and sort of see, maybe re-listen to this and see if I like it as a format. Um, and I do recommend this book, at least giving it a read if you're interested in Japanese culture. Yamamoto Tsunetomo always said to his retainers, "Go ahead and gamble and lie. A person who will not tell you 7 lies within 100 yards is useless as a man." Long ago, people spoke in this fashion because they were only concerned with a man's attitude towards military matters, and considered that a man who was correct would never do great works. They also ignored the misconduct of men, and dismissed such matters by saying they do good works too. Men like Sagara Kiyoma also excused retainers who had committed theft and adultery and trained them gradually. He said, "If it weren't for such persons, we would have no useful men at all." That's interesting. It's sort of like there's like a bit of passing on a tradition. It's like, well, in the past, people used to be like have all these vices, but they were useful in other ways, so we kept them around. Um, Maybe it's a bit of an admonition to not have too much of a purity mindset. I don't know. When Nakano Takumi was dying, his whole house gathered, and he said, "You should understand that there are 3 conditions to the resolution of a retainer. They are the condition of the master's will, the condition of vitality, and the condition of one's death." I have no idea what word condition is and how it was translated, but I bet it's something that doesn't translate super easily because I don't actually understand that. Oh, here we go. Here's another one. A lot of this is on like sharpness of intent, sharpness of will. Um, a lot of commentary on seppuku, or ritual suicide, in this book. I'll read this. At the time of a certain person's seppuku, when the kaishaku cut off his head, sorry, pause. Kaishaku is the guy who cuts your head off. So the idea with seppuku, for those who aren't aware, you cut yourself in the abdomen, draw the blade across your abdomen, which is thought to be one of the more painful ways to die, and then a guy, your second, or the kaishaku, cuts your head off. I believe they're supposed to do it when it seems like you're not able to take it anymore. So sort of fail safe. At the time of a certain person's seppuku, when the kaishaku cut off his head, a little bit of skin was left hanging, and the head was not entirely separated from the body. The official observer said, "There's some left." The kaishaku got angry, took hold of the head, and cutting it completely off, held it above eye level and said, "Take a look." It is said that it was rather chilling. This is a story of Master Sukemon's. In the practice of past times, there were instances when the head flew off. It is said that it is best to cut, leaving a little skin remaining so it doesn't fly off in the direction of the verifying officials. However, at present, it is best to cut clean through. A man who had cut off 50 heads once said, "According to the head, there are cases where even the trunk of a body will bring some reaction to you. Cutting off just 3 heads, at first there's no reaction and you can cut well. But when you get to 4 or 5, you feel quite a bit of reaction. At any rate, since this is a very important matter, if one always plans on bringing the head to the ground, there should be no mistakes." This is like literally like practical advice on how to pull off cutting a dude's head off. Um, yeah. Whew. There's a way in which I rereading now. It's like I understand why I was into this stuff when I was 12 or 13 because there's so many like cool stories. This is sort of like it's sort of like a dude's rock energy about it. Let's see. We've got an adultery story. Yeah, this is a good one. Let's read it. When a certain person returned home from some place or other, he found his wife committing adultery with a retainer in the bedroom. When he drew near the two, his retainer fled through the kitchen. He then went into the bedroom and slew his wife. Calling the maidservant, he explained what had happened and said, "Because this would bring shame to the children, it should be covered up as death by illness, and I will need considerable help. If you think that this is too much for you, I may as well kill you too for your part in this serious crime." She replied, "If you will spare my life, I will go on as though I don't know anything." She rearranged the room and set out the corpse in its bedclothes. Then, after sending a man to the doctor's place 2 or 3 times, saying that there was a sudden illness, they sent a last messenger saying it was too late and there was no longer any need to come. The wife's uncle was called in and told about the illness, and he was convinced. The entire affair was passed off as death by illness, and to the end no one knew the truth. At a later date, the retainer was dismissed. This affair happened in Edo. I love this story. This, first of all, what a window into a different world than the one we live in, right? Like, as far as my understanding of the period goes, if you were if you were a samurai, basically you could kill dudes, and like that was your power, just as a class in society. Um, And so, first of all, what a window into another world. Like, the guy kills his wife. He threatens to kill the maidservant. Probably he could if he wanted to. And this is just like, yeah, that's not even the focus. It's not like some crazy illegal thing. Just what a different location for the sovereign use of force in a way, um, or unilateral. I don't know what the term is. Secondly, a lot of us, I think, would read this like this is horrible because they covered something up. I think that's misunderstanding the Japanese mindset. I think the mindset being expressed here is that actually this was handled well. I believe this in part because in other parts of the Hagakure, Tsunetomo talks about how you want to be able to like take the fall for your master, and how this is one of the roles of the retainer. And I like this kind of recounting of the play by play of how they covered up the adultery and the killing as a sort of a sort of practical knowledge that was that they were attempting to that he Tsunetomo was attempting to transmit. Let's do a few more. You know, The basic meaning of etiquette is to be quick at both the beginning and end, and tranquil in the middle. Mitani Chizemon heard this and said, "That's just like being a kaishaku." Hmm. Now here's some good old-fashioned misogyny. A certain man said, "I know the shapes of reason and of woman." When asked about this, he replied, "Reason is four-cornered and will not move even in an extreme situation. Woman is round. One can say that she does not distinguish between good and evil or right and wrong and tumbles into any place at all." This is very similar to some classical Greek stuff. A different world. I think I will try. I think I'll release this and see what people think. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard so far. Let's read like two more. According to what one of the elders said, taking an enemy on the battlefield is like a hawk taking a bird. Even though it enters into the midst of 1,000 of them, it gives no attention to any bird other than the one that it has first marked. Moreover, what is called a tezuke no kubi is a head that one has taken after having made the declaration, "I will take that warrior wearing such and such armor." Sorry, I'm like, my throat's getting dry. This is great. This is like if you call your shot and pull it off, then that's called a tezuke no kubi. You can remember that. Takeda Shingen's retainer, Amaribizen no Kami, was killed in action, and his son, Tozo, at the age of 18, took over his father's position as an armed horseman attached to a general. Once a certain man in his group received a deep wound, and since the blood would not clot, Tozo ordered him to drink the feces of a red-haired horse mixed with water. The wounded man said, "Life is dear to me. How can I drink horse feces?" Tozo heard this and said, "What an admirably brave warrior. What you say is reasonable. However, the basic meaning of loyalty requires us to preserve our lives and gain victory for our master on the battlefield. Well, then, I'll drink some for you." Then he drank some himself and handed over the cup to the man, who took the medicine gratefully and recovered. I don't think we're going to beat that. So let's call it here. And I hope you have a great day and have enjoyed this brief dalliance through the pastures of Yamamoto Tsunetomo's Hagakure.